The regiment, present arms. This time, Julia Overheisel will sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Our guest speaker here at the cemetery needs no introduction. Representative Harrington has spoken at our gathering since being elected our state representative a number of years ago. It is my pleasure to introduce Representative Harrington.
Thank you very, very much again for the honor of allowing me to speak today. It is always a very humbling experience when you are asked to speak at a ceremony that honors our fallen heroes. When we think of Memorial Day and what it means to us, I think we very often bring up images in our minds, images of battlefields we saw in history books, documentary reels of infantrymen in the jungles of Vietnam, the landing carrier on Normandy as the soldiers walked off onto the beaches. And although that is appropriate that we would most likely think of those situations when we think of Memorial Day, as combat was probably the cause of more deaths over time in our armed services, there are others, and we still have to recognize that there are those who didn't serve in combat roles but still showed uncommon valor. Several years ago, I read of one of them, a man by the name of Dory Miller. He was actually the first African American to receive the Navy Cross. He was a kitchen worker aboard a ship in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. When they'd already taken many casualties and there was no one there to man it, he picked up an anti-aircraft machine gun and shot down at least 3 to 4 enemy aircraft. He fired until he ran out of ammunition, and by then they were being ordered to abandon ship. In our own local area, I know of a veteran who served as a truck driver during the Second World War, and he was awarded the French Cross for his bravery in driving his truck as a young man in his late teens to Dachau to rescue prisoners and bring them back to safety in France. These were certainly men, common men, who showed uncommon valor in the face of adversity. But the uncommon heroes that I want to speak of today, I only learned about this past year. This past year, I was honored to attend an event commemorating the 75th anniversary of Four Chaplains Day. Now, this is commemorated every single year in our area, but this particular year was the 75th anniversary. I didn't really know much about it. I didn't know much about what these four chaplains did, but I can say that what I learned that day had an enormous impact on me, and I want to share it with you this Memorial Day. Four Chaplains Day is commemorated each year on or about February 3rd in recognition of the four men who served as chaplains and gave their lives in the line of duty during the early hours of February 3rd, 1943, while they were serving aboard the U.S. Army transport Dorchester, which had been torpedoed by a German U-boat. Chaplain George L. Fox, a Methodist minister, was the oldest of the four chaplains, and he knew all about war. At the age of 17, he lied about his age, and he enlisted in the First World War, which we just spoke of. He served as a medical corps assistant, and he earned the Silver Star for rescuing a wounded soldier from a battlefield filled with poisonous gas. He earned the Croix de Guerre for outstanding bravery in artillery barrage, and he earned the Purple Heart for wounds. He was a minister in Vermont when the Second World War broke out and the U.S. involvement began, and he once again enlisted, telling his wife, "I've got to go. I know from experience what they are about to face, and they need me." Chaplain Clark V. Poling was the youngest of the four chaplains, and he was the seventh generation in his family to be ordained a minister. When the war came, he was anxious to go, but not as a chaplain. "I'm not going to hide behind the church in some safe office out of the firing line," he told his father. The elder Poling, a minister, replied, "Don't you know that chaplains have the highest mortality rate of all? As a chaplain, you'll have the best chance in the world to be killed. You just can't carry a gun and kill anyone yourself." Before leaving, Chaplain Poling asked his father to pray for him. He said, "Do not pray for my safe return, for that wouldn't be fair. Just pray that I shall do my duty and have the strength, courage, and understanding of men. Just pray that I shall be adequate." Chaplain John P. Washington was one of 9 children born to an Irish immigrant family. He was blessed with a sunny disposition and a beautiful singing voice. He also loved a good fight and actually served as a street gang leader in New Jersey prior to being called to the priesthood. As a Catholic priest, he played ball with the boys of his parish and he organized sports teams. When the war came along, he went with his boys into the army when they were called to action. He went with the hope of comforting them and possibly granting absolution when these young men may face certain death. They say that his wonderful voice was raised in prayer and song until his final moments aboard the Dorchester on that fateful night 75 years ago. Chaplain Alexander D. Good was both an outstanding athlete and a scholar. Following in his father's footsteps, this young man, who was also known for his laughter and his love of life, became a rabbi. While studying for his calling, he served in the National Guard and he kept his active membership. He married his childhood sweetheart, and when World War II broke out, he answered the call to serve on active duty. During that tragic night 75 years ago, one soldier remembered, over the din, he heard a terror-filled voice saying, "I can't find my life jacket." Turning toward that voice, he clearly heard Chaplain Fox say, "Here's one, soldier." Then the soldier witnessed Chaplain Fox remove his life jacket and put it on the soldier. At the same time, Navy Lieutenant John Mahoney cursed himself for leaving his gloves in his quarters. Chaplain Good stopped him from returning for the gloves, saying, "Don't bother, Mahoney, I have another pair. You can have these." Rabbi Good then removed the gloves from his hands and gave them to Mahoney. Mahoney later realized that a man preparing to abandon ship would not likely be carrying a second pair of gloves. Many of the survivors reported similar encounters with one or more of the chaplains. They seemed to be everywhere on the deck until the very end. Many survivors reported that in the final moments, the four chaplains locked arms and prayed in unison as their ship sank. Whether that part is accurate or not is actually unimportant. What is important is that these Army chaplains sacrificed themselves for their soldiers and for their God that they served. Ronald Reagan once said, "Heroes may not be braver than anyone else. They're just braver 5 minutes longer." I think the four chaplains showed this fact as they went down to the final moments. These chaplains were common men who showed uncommon valor. Many years after the Dorchester sank, a 60th anniversary commemorating the actions of the four chaplains was held in Washington, D.C. Ironically, 2 officers from the U-boat that had sunk the Dorchester were invited to honor the memory of these 4 chaplains. One German U-boat officer, a gentleman named Gerhard Busk, spoke at the commemoration, trying to describe for all the lessons of these 4 chaplains. He said that their lessons were that we ought to love when others hate. We can bring faith where doubt threatens. We can awaken hope where despair exists. We can light up a light where darkness reigns. And we can bring joy where sorrow dominates. It is my profound hope that we all carry the lessons of these 4 chaplains in our heart, and that we live in gratitude for the sacrifices others have made, that we remember and that we always make sure that their sacrifices were not in vain. They were common men of uncommon valor, and we thank them and we pray that they now rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. You always have interesting things to tell us. This year we honor those men and women who served in World War I. According to our records, there are 16 veterans buried here in Central Cemetery who served during that war. Fortunately, none of them were killed in action. We'll be placing wreaths at 2 of those veterans' grave sites to honor them all. Private William Stancombe and Private Elmer Brow. I'd like to point out that the Brow family is here, his granddaughter and extended family, and we thank them for coming out today. The veteran David Ambrose and Scout Shannon Crandall will put the wreath at the Brow headstone, and veteran Pete Eberhardt and Lila Ledbeard will do the Stancombe gravestone. I'd like to point out that Elmer Brow, it should be noted, served Dunstable as town accountant for 25 years, from 1923 to his death in 1948. also like to recognize another veteran here today that served this community steadfastly for 2 different stints as a Board of Selectmen for over 20 years, Mr. Walter Altericio. At this time, I'll read the names of all the town residents that have passed on since last Memorial Day. Before doing that, I want to bring special attention to one of those individuals. On September 14, 2017, Special Forces Staff Sergeant Alexander Delita was killed in a training exercise at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Alexander was a former resident of Dunstable, and his mother and father still live on Pleasant Street. He is survived by a wife and 4 daughters, along with his mother, father, and sister. We might often ask, who do we send to protect and defend us? The answer is we send our very best. Now the roll call of those who have passed. George W. Bacon, Desi June Brownell, Jean Page Carpenter, Fred Alvin Choate, Ruth Tully Choate, William J. Cormier, Edward A. Cassette, Staff Sergeant Alexander Paul Delita, James J. Davey, Michael R. DeRoches, Joseph Patrick Donlin, Daniel Dumont, Charles Ellsbury, Mary Ann Harrington, Richard L. Gay, Richard Philip Henry, Robert Only Erzick, Robert J. Erzick, Robert J. Jeffrey, Joanne J. Jenkins, Jean Marie Jones, Richard Kenny, Joseph Lynch, Amanda Mary McCormick, George Patrick Monroe, William Reed Pepin Jr., Raymond K. Redden, Phyllis May Rudovich, Carlene A. Sabatino, Helen J. Swartz, Mary Ann Silk, Phyllis F. Staples, Victor E. Stewart, David G. Sweet, Brett Alexander Tully, Lottie Whitaker. And I forgot one named Dorothy DeRoche as well. At this time, I'd like Pastor Ross to give us the benediction.
John 15:13 says, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends." We're not simply moved by the loss of life. We're moved by the selfless sacrifice. We're moved by the fact that those who gave their lives in service to our country gave them not just for friends, but for total strangers. We remember today all those who have come before us and given the greatest gift to our nation, their lives. Their duty, their honor, and their lives are precious gifts given to the future of our country and our families. We gather today to give tribute respect, remembrance, and honor to the gallant men and women of our armed services, armed forces, who gave their all for us and others, who called upon their help. Let me pray. Gracious God, we thank you for the life you have given us. We thank you for how you've demonstrated your love and sacrifice for us. We thank you for your beautiful image of selfless sacrifice that we see in the men and women who gave their lives for us so that we may be free, a reflection of the selfless sacrifice of Jesus. Be with those who mourn loss. Comfort those who carry the scars of battle, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. Help us to remember the sacrifice of the many who have come before us. And Lord, in your mercy, we ask for a day when we no longer experience the destruction of war and the loss of life. We look forward to the day when in your mercy you grant us true, eternal peace. Until that day, give us the grace and strength to endure. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our observances for Memorial Day. Please join us all back at the fellowship hall at the church. Be careful, the traffic is flowing, so we're not parading back, we're just walking back. I'd like you to use the school driveway entrance into the fellowship hall as the other entrance is under construction. I'd like to acknowledge the cemetery workers and the great job they do here. All the attending veterans, the 1st Middlesex Regiment, thank them for their participation. All the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and the Brownies and their leaders. The use of the hall and the church, neighbor to neighbor. Rosa Sharon for the donation of the wreath bows, and Crystal Farms for the use of their electricity, and all the participations, and truly all of you who have come out. You make it worthwhile. Thank you so much, and have a great Memorial Day weekend.